And he's able to spy on the British at the highest levels. He gets all that information, goes to the Americans, gives them all that information, comes back to the British, gives them false information on the Americans. He does this double agent thing back and forth many, many times. He is the reason. James Armistead, great black patriot, he's the reason we were able to end the war at Yorktown when we did, or win the battle at Yorktown that ultimately won the war for us. Never hear about these guys because it doesn't fit into today's view of what we want to think of as the Founding Fathers. That's some of the signers of the Declaration. Let's just grab a few of these framers of the Constitution, 55 guys, 39 that actually signed. That's Abraham Baldwin on the far left, founder of the University of Georgia. This guy was a chaplain in the Revolutionary War for 7 years. Couldn't find Christians to be our chaplain, so we had to get atheist, agnostic, deist, enemies of Christ Founding Fathers to do that for us. And this atheist Founding Father was offered a professorship of divinity at Yale when he's only 23 years old. So pretty interesting for an atheist. That guy right there, that's Charles Cosworth Pinckney and John Langdon. Now, how many of y'all have heard of the American Bible Society? That one's still around today. They give out 200 to 300 million Bibles every single year. It's all started by the two atheists you see in the picture there. James McHenry there started the Baltimore Bible Society. Jacob Broom, John Dickinson, Roger Sherman. You can read their treatises on the doctrines of Christianity. They're major theologians of their day. Now, in the interest of time, again, can't cover them all, but I'm going to tell you right now, we can break down the numbers and I can document each of them for you if you want. But out of the Founding Fathers, the 250 men we consider to be our Founding Fathers, we have writings from about 80% of them. So for those 80%, we can crack their head open, we can get into what they really believe. 95% of those guys were outspoken Christians. They wanted faith not only a part of our private, but our public life. I will give you 10 or 11 out of the 250 that were not Christians. But not one of them was an atheist. Not one was an agnostic. Not one was a deist. A deist, by any definition today, believes in a watchmaker God. There's some big banana in the sky that created everything and then steps back and has nothing to do with our daily life. You can't apply that to any of those Founding Fathers. They believed in the hand of providence. They believed God was involved in our daily lives. They were not atheists. They were not agnostics and deists. The closest one would be Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine, when he wrote Age of Reason, sent a manuscript over to Benjamin Franklin, another non-Christian. He's one of the 10 or 11 that I would not put in the category of Christian. Neither is Jefferson. But Thomas Paine sends this manuscript over to Benjamin Franklin. It's kind of a New Age type thing that we would read today. And he says, I want your input on this. Benjamin Franklin says, he who spits in the wind spits in his own faith. He says, Mr. Paine, you say you're a good man even though you're not a Christian. But he said, where did you get those principles? Your family raised you as a Christian. That's where the principles came from. He said, burn the manuscript before anyone else sees it. He says, you will not have a good society if you remove Christianity from this society. He said, you're unleashing the tiger. He said, as bad as men are with religion, how bad will they be without it? Even Benjamin Franklin himself, he said to Whitfield, if we could just start one of these, start a nation that taught the Christian religion to everyone, it was based on the Christian religion, we'd have a great society. And he's not even a Christian, but he recognizes the practical benefits of Christianity in a society. He recognizes that a Christian nation experiences more freedom than any other form. And actually, we've seen that happen, obviously, in our nation. But I tell you what we'll do. This is kind of the Ginsu knife part of the presentation. You know, some of you might remember that commercial. But wait, there's more. Because every one of us can go to the library and we say, what happened on September 7th, 1774? Any ideas? Just a guess. It's the opening session of Congress. Very first time the United States Congress meets. What's it look like they're doing to you? One of these guys gets up and he says, you know, we should start with a prayer. Another guy says, no, we've got every denomination possible in this room. How could we possibly start with a prayer? Samuel Adams, father of the American Revolution, stands up. He says, I'm no bigot. I can pray with every man in this room. Let's pray. They bring in the Reverend Jacob Bechet. They prayed for 3 hours. And they had a Bible study. John Adams wrote home to Abigail. He said, Abigail, God so spoke to us out of Psalms 35. We believe for the first time we can defeat the British. He said, tell everybody back home to study Psalms 35 so God can speak to them the same way that he did to us. Prayer and a Bible study by a bunch of atheist enemies of Christ there in Congress. Pretty amazing. But I'll tell you what, second time, one more Founding Father, guy that, you know, you can probably tell at this point, I don't know, that the ACLU and I do not agree on a lot of things. It might be obvious, might not. We actually do agree on some things. I've worked with the guy in Texas that's the head of the ACLU on a lot of legislation. We've agreed on a lot of civil liberty issues. But when it comes to this religion and society thing, we tend to disagree. In fact, when I filed my legislation that I passed back in Texas that required students in Texas to study the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution every single year and to memorize those 56 words we started with tonight, the ACLU said that'd be unconstitutional to study the Declaration of Independence because it mentions God 4 times. We wouldn't want to do that in a classroom today. So we definitely don't agree on a lot of things. We do agree on some things. Here's one we agree on, that this man right here is one of our least religious founding fathers. I already talked about him a little bit, Benjamin Franklin. But least is a relative term. That's what I want to try to show you tonight. Let's take Franklin at the Constitutional Convention. Now, the guy's 81. All right, 81. Think about that. I used to think 81 was old. And the grayer my hair gets, Danny, and the more it falls out, 81 is starting to sound a little younger. But 81 today is not a big deal, and I have proof of that. I was with Congressman Ralph Hall about 2 years ago. Congressman from Texas, been in Congress about 40 years. And he and I were speaking on this program. Well, he gets up, and he's been my congressman growing up, so that tells you how long he's been there. And we get up, he gets up to speak first. He looks over at me, he says, Rick, I used to think 81 was old. He said, I turned 81 last week. He said, but I went to Senator Strom Thurmond's 100-year birthday party. He said, I felt a little better at that point. He said, but Senator Thurmond looked over at me, and he said, oh, to be 80 again. so 80 today, guys, no big deal, all right? Kind of normal. Back then, you know what the average lifespan was? 35. This guy's 81. Man, he's the elder statesman. When he speaks, everybody is going to listen. And they were listening. He gets up to give his longest speech at the convention on June 28, 1787. Now, this is a point, if you go back and you read all the journals, it looked like everything was going to fall apart. It looked like there would not be an agreement. And so he gets up in the midst of all that, and he starts off by saying this. He says, in the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Now, before giving you more of a speech, think about what he just said. He's saying, in the beginning, we had prayer in this room. See, Franklin's one of only 6 guys to sign both the Constitution and the Declaration. So there at Independence Hall at the Constitutional Convention, he's able to say to everybody else, look, I was in this room more than a decade ago when we didn't have a chance. We were going to take on this great military power, nothing to show. We couldn't win. We needed God on our side if we were going to win. And this supposed atheist founding father went on to say, our prayers were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us engaged in the struggle must observe frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. Then he asks a question we need to be asking in America today. Have we now forgotten this powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? I've lived so a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proves I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. You've probably heard this part, if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, it's probable that an empire can rise without his aid. We've been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and his blessing on our deliberation be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. That's your least religious founding father. He sounds like a Bible-thumping evangelical to me. I mean, he's taking the Bible out, hitting everybody else over the head with it, saying not only do we need a public expression of faith, we need it every day. We need to constantly remind ourselves of who we are dependent upon and how important it is for us to recognize that dependence and pray for those blessings. Now, obviously, a lot of folks today differentiate between a public expression and private expression. Probably everybody in this room would say, it's okay, Rick, for you to worship at church any way you want. It's okay for you to pray at home all you want. Oh, don't you get on that public school microphone. Oh, don't get those 10 Commandments out there where anybody can see them. See, you differentiate between a private expression and a public expression. These guys didn't. They're saying you need both. That's why you had those proclamations by presidents and governors and others. Public expressions of faith. That's how we honor the source. We need God back in our equation of freedom here in America. Now, the second thing we need to do is honor sacrifice. Because you and I wouldn't be sitting in this room tonight enjoying this freedom of speech and freedom of expression that we have tonight, and you'll be able to answer any question you want here in a few minutes. It wouldn't happen if it weren't for these guys and gals right here. They're the ones that have preserved freedom for us, protected it, and put their lives on the line. Now, we'll give you a couple of Bible verses tonight because they apply to this. Render honor unto whom honor is due. I think there's no group more honorable and more worthy of us honoring than those that are willing to lay down their lives for their friends, willing to pay the ultimate price so that freedom can survive for you and I. I encourage you to thank them. I don't know how many of y'all saw this. How many of y'all saw this movie, Saving Private Ryan? Anybody? A few of y'all? Here's what I remember about this movie. It had a big impact on me right at the end because it made me really think about the price of freedom and what I'm doing to preserve it. You might remember at the end, of course, you know the storyline. Private Ryan's, all his brothers have been killed in action, and the Army said, we want to get this kid home to his family, and Captain John Miller is the one that is given the responsibility, as Tom Hanks' character,